What was Robert Schumann's job?
Robert was a composer.
Where did Robert and Clara Schumann live?
They lived in what is now Germany.
What did Robert Schumann love as a boy?
As a boy, he loved books and music.
What did Robert's father want him to do?
His father wanted him to be a musician.
What did Robert's mother want him to study?
His mother wanted him to study law.
What did Robert think about in class?
In class, he was always thinking about music.
What did Robert do when he left law school?
He left law school and began taking piano lessons from Frederick Wick.
So who is Frederick Wick?
Mr. Wick was the father of a famous young pianist, Clara.
Okay. Who was Clara?
Clara was a rising star. By the age of 15, she had performed all over Europe.
What did the emperor in Austria do for Clara?
The emperor in Austria honored her with a big award.
How old was Clara when Robert came to live with her family?
Clara was just 11 years old when Robert, aged 20, came to live with her family.
How did Robert describe Clara?
Robert wrote, "What a creature Clara is. She certainly talked more cleverly than any of us. She is full of whims and fancies, laughter and tears, death and life."
What did Robert notice about Clara right from the beginning?
Robert noticed that Clara was as passionate as he was.
Who did Clara fall secretly in love with?
Clara, meanwhile, fell secretly in love with Robert.
What did Clara write in her diary?
She wrote in her diary, "Oh, I love no one as I love him."
What did Clara do when Robert composed a new piece of music?
Whenever Robert composed a new piece of music, she was the first to play it.
How did Robert express his affection towards Clara?
Robert wrote a sonata in F minor and dedicated it to her.
What happened between Clara and Robert one night before Clara was about to leave on a tour?
One night when Clara was about to leave on a tour, she and Robert found themselves alone together. They kissed. Clara and Robert were in love.
Why was Mr. Wick angry?
He knew that Robert was often depressed and that he didn't have much money. He feared that if Clara married Robert, she would be unhappy and poor.
What did Mr. Wick tell Clara and Robert?
He told Clara she could never see Robert again, and he told Robert he would shoot him.
Did Clara and Robert stop seeing each other?
Clara and Robert loved each other too much never to speak again.
How did Clara and Robert communicate with each other? Did they use
They
cell
wrote-
phone?
No, they wrote letters to each other in code.
Who delivered their letters?
Their friends delivered the letters secretly.
What is music like for Clara and Robert?
For Clara and Robert, music was like a secret language.
What piece did Robert begin to write?
Robert began a piece called Fantasy in C major.
Right. What did he write to Clara?
He later wrote to Clara, "I don't think I ever wrote anything more impassioned than the first movement. It is a profound lament about you."
Why did Clara and Robert need special approval from the court to get married?
The law said that a woman needed to be 21 in order to marry without her father's permission. Clara was not yet 21, and her father refused to give permission.
Did the court give permission for Clara and Robert to get married?
The court consented.
When did Clara and Robert get married?
One day before Clara's 21st birthday, she and Robert wed.
How many songs did Robert write that year?
That year, Robert wrote more than 140 songs.
Who were many of the love songs written for?
Many of them were love songs written for Clara.
Did Clara continue composing music?
Clara continued composing music, but not as often.
How did the public feel about Clara's performance?
The public adored her performances.
What did people find strange about Clara?
They found the idea of a woman composer strange.
Did Clara and Robert ever write music together?
Sometimes Clara and Robert wrote music together and published it under his name.
What did Robert experiment with each year?
Each year, Robert experimented with new musical forms.
After trying songs, what musical form did Robert experiment with next?
After songs, he tried symphonies.
Okay. After symphonies, what musical form did Robert experiment with next?
After symphonies, he tried chamber music.
What did Robert write about his piano?
He wrote, I am tempted to smash my piano as it is becoming too narrow to contain my ideas.
Why did Robert feel like smashing his piano?
He was angry and cringed.
Because it was becoming too narrow to contain his idea. Did many people know about Robert's music?
No, at this time, not many people knew Robert's music.
Where did Robert and Clara go on a concert tour?
Once Robert went with Clara on a concert tour in Russia.
How did Robert feel when someone asked him if he was a musician?
Robert was hurt that people knew about his wife but not about him.
Did Robert and Clara love each other?
Yes, Robert and Clara loved each other.
Did Robert and Clara have a small or big family?
They had a big family to take care of.
Right. So how many children did they have?
They have 8 children altogether.
Did Robert suffer from a disease?
Robert suffered from a disease known today as bipolar disorder.
Okay. What did Robert do when his disease worsened?
One day he threw himself into a river.
Was Robert rescued by a boatman?
He was rescued by a boatman.
What did Robert ask for a few days later?
A few days later, Robert asked to be taken to a hospital for the mentally ill.
How did Robert die?
Robert asked to be taken to a hospital for the mentally ill and died there 2 years later.
How old was Robert when he died?
He was 46 years old.
What did Clara do after her husband died?
She performed and taught music and introduced many people to Robert's work.
What did Clara ask her grandson to do on her deathbed?
On her deathbed, she asked her grandson to play one of her husband's most romantic songs.
What happened when Clara asked her grandson to play Robert's song?
It was the last music she ever heard.
Right. What should you do when you listen to music by Clara and Robert music?
When you hear music by Clara and Robert Schumann, listen closely for the feelings in the music: love, longing, joy, and sadness.
What should you remember this story when you listen to music by Clara and Robert Schumann?
Remember the story and you will know where the feelings came from.
What is the writer wondering about at the beginning of the text?
He said, do you ever wonder about the people who make music and movies and art? Do you wonder where they get their ideas? I do.
What did the writer like about the story of Robert and Clara Schumann?
He liked it because it was a love story and love was expressed through their music.
What is the writer's suggestion to the readers at the end of the note?
Turn on the audio and listen to Robert and Clara's music. How do you feel?
What is the writer's name who wrote this note?
Julia Schaffer. When you hear beautiful music, do you wonder, who is the person who wrote this? What was his or her life like? This is the story of Robert and Clara Schumann. Robert was a composer. He created music that people still enjoy today. Clara was a performer. It was said that she was one of the most soulful and famous pianists of her day. She was also a composer. They lived in what is now Germany. They lived. They fell in love. They made music. They married. And they died. But there is more to the story than that. Robert Schumann was born in 1810. He was the youngest of 5 children. As a boy, he loved books and music. His father wanted him to be a musician, but his mother wanted him to study law. Robert followed his mother's wishes and entered law school. In class, he was always thinking about music. So he left law school and began taking piano lessons from Frederick Wick. Mr. Wick was the father of a famous young pianist, Clara. Clara was a rising star. By the age of 15, she had performed all over Europe. The emperor in Austria honored her with a big award. Clara was just 11 years old when Robert, aged 20, came to live with her family. Robert wrote, "What a creature Clara is! She certainly talks more cleverly than any of us. She is full of whims and fancies, laughters and tears, death and life." Right from the beginning, Robert saw that Clara was as passionate as he was. Clara, meanwhile, fell secretly in love with Robert. She wrote in her diary, "Oh, I love no one as I love him." Whenever Robert composed a new piece of music, she was the first to play it. Robert wrote a sonata in F minor and dedicated it to her. One night, when Clara was about to leave on a tour, she and Robert found themselves alone together. They kissed. Clara and Robert were in love. When Mr. Wick learned this, he was angry. He knew that Robert was often depressed and that he didn't have much money. He feared that if Clara married Robert, she would be unhappy and poor. He told Clara she could never see Robert again, and he told Robert he would shoot him. But Clara and Robert loved each other too much never to speak again. They wrote letters to each other in code. Their friends delivered the letters secretly. They also played music. For Clara and Robert, music was like a secret language. Robert began a piece called Fantasy in C major. He later wrote to Clara, "I don't think I ever wrote anything more impassioned than the first movement. It is a profound lament about you. You can understand the fantasy only if you transport yourself back to the unhappy summer of 1836, when I had to give you up." The law said that a woman needed to be 21 in order to marry without her father's permission. Clara was not yet 21, and her father refused to give permission. Clara and Robert requested special approval from the court. The court consented. One day before Clara's 21st birthday, she and Robert wed. That year, Robert wrote more than 140 songs. Many of them were love songs written for Clara. Clara continued composing music, but not as often. The public adored her performances, but they found the idea of a woman composer strange. Sometimes Clara and Robert wrote music together and published it under his name. Each year, Robert experimented with new musical forms. After songs, he tried symphonies. After symphonies, he tried chamber music. He wrote, "I am tempted to smash my piano as it is becoming too narrow to contain my ideas." At this time, not many people knew Robert's music. Once Robert went with Clara on a concert tour in Russia. Someone asked him, "Are you a musician too?" Robert was hurt that people knew about his wife but not about him. Robert and Clara loved each other, but their life together was not easy. They had a big family to take care of, with 8 children altogether. Also, Robert suffered from a disease known today as a bipolar disorder. This disease made him nervous, sad, and afraid. As the years passed, Robert's disease worsened. One day he threw himself into a river. He tried to kill himself, but he was rescued by boatmen. A few days later, Robert asked to be taken to a hospital for the mentally ill and died there 2 years later. He was 46 years old. Clara lived a long time after Robert died. She performed and taught music and introduced many people to Robert's work. On her deathbed, she asked her grandson to play one of her husband's most romantic songs. It was the last music she ever heard. Someday you will hear music by Clara and Robert Schumann. When you do, listen closely for the feelings in the music: love, longing, joy, and sadness. Remember this story and you will know where the feelings came from.